The day humanity stood up. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council had witnessed empires rise and fall, had seen the fate of entire civilizations decided with a single vote, and had played host to negotiations that determined the balance of power in the galaxy. But today, something was different. Today, the humans were walking away, and no one knew what was about to happen next. The Council's offer. The ceiling of the Grand Hall stretched impossibly high, shimmering under the glow of artificial starlight. The walls, adorned with intricate crystalline formations, reflected the combined bioluminescence, metallic sheen, and color-shifting hues of the gathered species. 100 voices whispered in anticipation, their words hushed but filled with certainty. The humans were about to be tamed. At the highest seat of the circular assembly, High Chancellor Vorin rose, his robes woven with threads of gold and authority. He spread his arms, a gesture of magnanimous superiority, and his voice rang through the chamber, smooth and honeyed. Humanity's progress has been admirable, Vorin declared, his lips curling ever so slightly. In mere millennia, you have stumbled your way from primitive tools to the stars. A commendable effort, truly. From their seats, 5 humans sat in silence. At their center, Elias Young, chief negotiator of the United Terran Assembly, gave no visible reaction. His posture remained calm, unreadable, his dark blue diplomatic jacket meticulously pressed, his hands folded neatly before him. Beside him, Olivia Reyes, his second in command, leaned back in her chair. She tapped her fingers in an almost imperceptible rhythm against the datapad on her lap. The others, analysts, military advisors, trade officials, watched and waited. Vorin continued, his tone thick with condescension. It is with great generosity that this council extends an offer to humanity. Observer status. Class 2. The murmurs in the hall grew louder. Approving nods murmured agreement. They believed this was the moment humanity would accept its place. Vorin gestured grandly. You will be allowed restricted trade within approved networks, limited oversight on interstellar policies, and, of course, guidance from civilizations far older, far wiser than your own. Silence, a silence that stretched, pressed against the walls of the chamber like the moment before a storm breaks. Then, finally, Elias Young smiled. It wasn't a broad smile. It wasn't one of gratitude. No, it was the kind of smile that made diplomats sweat, the kind of smile that made military tacticians reach for contingency plans, a smile that knew something no one else in the room did. The mistake the council made. Elias leaned forward slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, almost pleasant. Just to clarify, he said, your offer requires us to submit our technological developments for council approval before implementation. Vorin, expecting this question, nodded. Naturally, it is for your own protection. Young species often lack the wisdom to properly manage advanced technology. A soft exhale. Elias's smile did not fade. And our trade routes. Vorin gave a dismissive wave. All economic ventures must, of course, be properly sanctioned through the Council's regulatory branches. A pause. It was small, barely perceptible, but Elias caught it. Vorin was lying. Olivia's eyes flicked toward Elias. A single look. An entire conversation exchanged without a single word. Then, Olivia exhaled, leaned forward, and laughed. The laugh that changed everything. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't a diplomatic chuckle. It was loud, full-bodied, unrestrained amusement. The kind of laugh that sent ripples of unease through the chamber. Several aquatic species involuntarily released ink into their breathing apparatuses. A Salari diplomat, whose bioluminescence pulsed in response to stress, flickered like a broken neon sign. Even the mechanized eye observers, beings without emotion, hesitated mid-calculation. Vorin's expression tightened. Commander Reyes, I failed to see the humor in this. Olivia grinned, shaking her head. I was just wondering, she mused, how long it would take before someone tried this old playbook on us. Confusion flickered across the faces of the assembled dignitaries. Voron's bioluminescent patches pulsed erratically. "This is a generous offer, Commander Reyes." Elias stood, smooth, effortless, like a chess player executing a move that had been decided 10 turns ago. "We appreciate your time," he said, reaching for his datapad. "Humanity formally declined your offer." The chamber froze. Voron's mandibles twitched. Elias adjusted his cuffs. "Effective immediately, we withdraw from these negotiations." A ripple of stunned silence swept through the chamber. Then, chaos. The moment the council lost control. "You can't simply. This is an outrage. The council does not tolerate such defiance." Voron's voice rose over the chaos, his bioluminescence flashing in raw frustration. "You would be wise to reconsider, Ambassador Young." For the first time, Elias let something flash in his eyes. A spark. Just a flicker. But enough. "I think," he said softly, "you should be very careful about who you think is in control here." And then, without another word, humanity turned and walked away. Behind them, the Galactic Council fell into chaos. The heavy doors of the Grand Hall sealed shut behind them, muffling the roar of panicked voices. The escape plan. Inside the diplomatic transport bay, their shuttle awaited. A sleek, gunmetal gray vessel, unmarked, unassuming, designed to be overlooked. Elias climbed the ramp, tapping his earpiece. "Control, we're en route. Status update." A voice crackled through the line. "Decker, their chief communications officer. You've got a problem." Elias paused. "Define problem." "There's a council blockade forming outside the Nexus jump gate." Olivia cursed under her breath. "They're trying to box us in." Decker's voice was laced with amusement. "Not just that. They'd frozen all outgoing diplomatic traffic. No ships are getting clearance to leave. Officially, they're calling it a security review. Unofficially, they're scrambling." Elias exhaled through his nose. Expected resistance, but this is fast. That means two things. Olivia nodded. They realized how badly they miscalculated. Elias gave a tight smile. "And they're afraid." A holographic display flared to life on Olivia's wrist terminal, a detailed layout of the blockade. Red-marked ships. Council patrol craft, tightening their formation, trying to force them back to the negotiating table. Or worse. Elias tilted his head. "Do we have a countermeasure?" Olivia grinned. The kind of grin that made opposing generals lose sleep. "I thought you'd never ask." The blockade that never stood a chance. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was still in chaos. Dignitaries shouted over one another. Panicked aides rushed to relay orders. The unthinkable had happened. Humanity had walked away from negotiations, rejecting the authority of the most powerful organization in the known universe. And now, they were trying to leave. The Council would not allow that. The Council's desperation. High Chancellor Voron, his bioluminescent patches pulsing erratically, watched as his carefully orchestrated plan unraveled before his eyes. The humans were not supposed to refuse. They were not supposed to leave. They were supposed to submit, like every other species before them. But now, the Terrans were walking out the door, and he knew, if they made it past the blockade, the Council's control over them would be permanently lost. That could not happen. Voron turned to his military attaché, Admiral Korak of the Cellari Defense Fleet, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed anger. "Order the blockade into full lockdown. No Terran ship is to leave this system." Korak hesitated. "Chancellor, this may escalate the situation." "They have already escalated it." Voron snapped. "Now shut them in." The Council's trap. Far above the planet, at the edge of the system, the Council's blockade tightened. At its center stood the Nexus jump gate, a colossal ring of metallic alloy floating in the vast emptiness of space, a doorway to the faster-than-light lanes that linked the galaxy together. A Terran ship couldn't leave without passing through it. And now, the Council had sealed it. Hundreds of warships, patrol corvettes, battlecruisers, and planetary defense platforms had formed an impenetrable wall around the exit. Their weapons were primed. Their orders were clear. The humans would not leave. The Terran response. On board the Terran diplomatic vessel, Elias Young sat in the command chair, watching the blockade display on his holoscreen. Olivia Reyes stood beside him, arms crossed. That's a lot of ships. Decker, their communications officer, let out a low whistle. They locked down everything. The entire Nexus Gate is under a no-fly order. Elias nodded. Expected. Olivia raised an eyebrow. You were expecting this. Elias glanced at her. Of course. Olivia sighed. And let me guess. Elias smiled. We planned for it. The Resolve takes flight. While their diplomatic shuttle was designed to be discreet, it was never their real escape plan. Hidden in the docking bay, disguised as an auxiliary transport, was a different ship altogether. The Resolve. A Terran-built warship, sleek and angular, its surface covered in a special alloy that absorbed sensor signals and rendered it invisible to standard scans. Unlike their shuttle, which carried no weapons, the Resolve was built for one thing: breaking through blockades. Elias tapped his communicator. Captain Rourke. Are you in position? A voice crackled through the comms. Locked and loaded. Just say the word. Olivia's lips curled into a grin. Let's make a mess. Breaking the Council's hold. As the Council blockade settled into position, preparing for a diplomatic standoff, the Resolve powered up silently within the station's hangar. The station's sensors did not detect it. The Council's fleet had no idea it was there. Until it moved. With a burst of controlled thrust, the Resolve shot out of the docking bay at impossible speed, accelerating before the Council could react. For half a second, the blockade fleet stood still, their officers confused by the sudden blip on their sensors. Then, everything happened at once. The first strike. The Resolve's electronic warfare suite activated. A pulse of electromagnetic interference flooded the Council fleet's systems, scrambling sensors, distorting targeting locks, and forcing defensive grids to reset. Admiral Korak, still aboard the Council's flagship, slammed his claws into the console. Where did they come from? His second-in-command, a panicked Xilari lieutenant, struggled to regain control of the targeting systems. Sir, we're losing sensor integrity. Korak gritted his mandibles. Fire everything. The gauntlet. The Council fleet opened fire, unleashing a storm of plasma bolts and railgun rounds. But the Resolve was too fast. It twisted through the onslaught of energy, skimming just above the largest battleships, dancing through gaps in the blockade that no ordinary pilot would dare attempt. Its shields shimmered as it deflected a few glancing hits, but the ship never slowed. Instead, it did something no one expected. It turned toward the Nexus jump gate. At full speed. The impossible maneuver. A normal ship would need a minute to align properly before jumping to FTL speeds. The Resolve did not have a minute. Instead, it executed a move that had never been attempted in Council history. It spiraled. At the very last second before entering the jump gate, the ship's engines twisted at a precise angle, sending it into a corkscrew rotation while maintaining velocity. The maneuver disrupted the Council's targeting algorithms, forcing their weapons to fire where the ship had been, not where it was going. And then, it vanished. Into the Nexus gate. Gone. The aftermath. The Council fleet stood paralyzed. Admiral Korak stared in silent horror. The blockade, their impenetrable blockade, had been defeated without a single shot fired in return. The humans had not only escaped, but had humiliated the entire Galactic Council in the process. High Chancellor Voran received the news moments later. He stood in his private chamber, listening to his aides report on the disaster, his bioluminescent skin flickering erratically with stress. This was not how it was supposed to go. Humanity was meant to kneel. Instead, they had laughed in his face and then disappeared into the void. For the first time in his long life, Vorin felt something new. Doubt. Had they just created their own worst nightmare? When the hunters became the prey. For the first time in galactic history, a species had defied the Galactic Council and escaped its grip without consequence. Or at least, that's what the Council thought. They believed the humans had run away, that they had simply fled, like so many others before them, seeking safety in the shadows of deep space. But what the Council had failed to understand, what they had never even considered, was a fundamental truth about humanity. They never run, not without a plan, not without striking back. And now the entire galaxy was about to learn what it meant to hunt a species that had already declared the game over before it began. The Council's reaction. A galaxy in panic. Inside the central command chambers of the Galactic Council, High Chancellor Vorin stood motionless, his bioluminescent glow flickering erratically with suppressed rage. Across the holographic war table, Council admirals, intelligence officers, and high-ranking officials sat in stunned silence, staring at the devastation of their blockade. Not a single human ship had been lost. Not one casualty had been confirmed. And yet the humans had disabled a fleet of over 200 warships, escaped the Nexus jump gate, and vanished into deep space, all without firing a single shot. The implications were terrifying. Admiral Korek, his mandibles clicking in distress, finally broke the silence. Chancellor, we cannot allow this to stand. This is an act of war. Vorin turned his gaze to the Admiral, and for the first time in his long career, his voice trembled. No, Admiral. He exhaled, slowly, carefully. This was not war. His gaze flickered to the frozen images of the blockade incident, the Resolve, the ship that had humiliated the Dominion's finest, vanishing into the Nexus gate like a ghost into the abyss. This was a message. The room fell silent again. A single question sat unspoken, lingering in the air like a knife against the throat of galactic stability. If this wasn't war, then what happens when the humans actually decide to fight? The hunt begins. The Council did what every great power does when it is faced with an enemy it does not understand. They sent their fleets. A full-scale mobilization was ordered. Across dozens of systems, task forces were deployed. Elite hunting squadrons, bounty hunters, cyber warfare units, entire armadas, all with a singular objective. Find the humans, bring them back in chains, crush their resistance before it grows. And so, the chase began. The galaxy held its breath, watching as the might of the Dominion stretched across the stars to track down one escaped Terran vessel. But what the galaxy did not yet realize was that it wasn't the humans who were being hunted. It was the Council. Phase 1. The Vanishing Act. While the Galactic Council's fleets expanded their search, fanning out across the jump lanes, they expected resistance. They expected humanity to hide, to retreat to the edges of colonized space, to build fortresses in the dark, and prepare for an inevitable last stand. They were wrong, because instead of hiding, humanity simply disappeared. Completely. The tracking networks of the Dominion, once thought to be infallible, found nothing. The human trade lanes, once easily monitored, ceased all transmissions. And worst of all, the human's home system, the Sol system itself, went dark. No messages, no signals, no broadcasts. For the first time in galactic history, an entire species simply ceased to exist on the grid. And that terrified the Council more than anything. Because the only thing more dangerous than a species you can control is one you can't even find. Phase 2. The Ghost Fleets. Then, the real nightmare began. It started with small things. An unmanned surveillance probe went silent along the outer rim. A Council resupply station, fully staffed, fully armed, sent out a distress beacon for a single second before vanishing completely. Then, entire battleships began dropping off the grid, one by one. A patrol squadron of 12 warships entered the dead zone between two star systems, searching for human activity. They never came back. A Council dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion's fleet, found itself stranded when every navigational system on board was overwritten by a virus no one could trace. Within weeks, the Council's forces were no longer the hunters. They were the ones being picked off. Phase 3, the first and last warning. The Council, growing desperate, convened an emergency session. They needed to know what they were up against. They needed answers. And they got one. A single unmarked Terran vessel appeared just outside the Galactic Council's core world, in a region of space where no one had ever dared trespass before. It did not approach. It did not attack. It simply broadcast one message. A message from Earth. The message was simple. We gave you a chance. A pause. A beat of silence that felt longer than the lifespan of an empire. We let you walk away. The transmission flickered, and then a new image appeared. Not a message. Not a declaration of war. A video feed. It showed one of the missing Council warships, a massive battlecruiser that had disappeared weeks earlier. Or rather, what was left of it. The ship had been disabled, completely powered down, and carefully dismantled, piece by piece. Every system had been surgically stripped, every classified database emptied, every weapon turned into scrap. Not destroyed, not obliterated. Simply taken apart. A slow, methodical dissection. And then the final words came through. Next time, we won't be so polite. Transmission ended. The galaxy finally understands. When the transmission cut to black, the Council stared at the empty screen, their minds racing through every possible scenario, every possible explanation, every possible response. And for the first time in millennia, they had none. Because this wasn't a war. It wasn't even a rebellion. This was something new, something they had never encountered before. A species that did not just fight with brute force. A species that did not play by the rules of war. A species that did not even need to fire a shot to bring empires to their knees. Humanity had walked away from the Council. And now, the entire galaxy knew what that truly meant. The question was no longer whether the Council could stop the humans. The question was, could they survive them?